From New York, this is Democracy Now!
I request all elementary, middle, and high schools and special needs schools to be temporarily closed from March 2nd until spring vacation.
Japan closes schools to contain the spread of the coronavirus as the disease spreads to at least 47 countries and every continent except Antarctica. President Trump downplays concerns.
Because of all we've done, the risk to the American people remains very low. We have the greatest experts in the world, really in the world, right here. We're ready to adapt and we're ready to do whatever we have to as the disease spreads, if it spreads.
As Trump spoke, it was reported a person was diagnosed with the coronavirus in California who had not traveled to any of the affected regions of the world, nor had known contact with anyone who did. It's called community spread. We'll speak with Pulitzer Prize-winning science writer Laurie Garrett, who says Trump has sabotaged America's coronavirus response. We'll also talk to science investigative journalist Sonia Shah about the connection between coronavirus and climate change. Her book, Pandemic: Tracking Contagion from Cholera to Ebola and Beyond. Then, as Trump leaves India, the death toll from anti-Muslim violence in New Delhi has risen to at least 34.
20 to 25 people started beating me. The rest were standing by as if they were watching a show. There were thousands behind them. They kept hitting me. Nobody came forward to save me. Somehow, some people came from the other side. I was like unconscious. I didn't have much consciousness. My clothes were drenched in blood.
We'll go to New Delhi for the latest. All that and more coming up. Welcome to Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. U.S. health officials said Wednesday they've identified the first case of a coronavirus infection by a person who had not traveled to any of the affected regions of the world nor had known contact with anyone else who did. The case in Northern California came as governments worldwide took increasingly severe measures to stop the transmission of the virus, which causes respiratory trouble and is sometimes fatal. In Saudi Arabia, officials have banned Muslim pilgrims from entering the country to visit the holy cities of Mecca and Medina. In South Korea, the number of coronavirus cases has passed 1,700, making it the largest outbreak outside of China. The U.S. and South Korea Wednesday called off joint military exercises indefinitely. Meanwhile, Japan says the 2020 Summer Olympics are still scheduled to take place in the capital, Tokyo. In the U.S., President Trump has sought repeatedly to dismiss the threat of the virus, tweeting on Wednesday morning, quote, "Low ratings, fake news, MSDNC, Comcast, and CNN are doing everything possible to make the coronavirus look as bad as possible, including panicking markets, if possible. Likewise, their incompetent, do-nothing Democrat comrades are all talk, no action. USA in great shape!" Exclamation point. President Trump tweeted, misspelling the word coronavirus. Trump's comments prompted alarm among Congress members, both Democrat and Republican. This is Democratic Congressmember Joe Kennedy of Massachusetts questioning Health and Human Services Secretary Alex Azar on Wednesday.
Mr. Secretary, I don't want to panic over this either. The stock market's crashing. He's trying to stop a stock market. He's not trying. He's outright contradicting everything that you all have just said. Outright contradiction.
I think he's expressing confidence in...
With no medical basis for it. That's what you've just explained to us. Come on, sir.
He's expressing that the American people need to take a breath here, that there's no change to anyone's daily life from this, that the country has a plan. We have pandemic plans.
Late on Wednesday, President Trump held a news conference at the White House saying he's tapped Vice President Mike Pence to coordinate federal response to the coronavirus. Pence is not a public health expert, and as governor of Indiana, slashed public health spending and is widely blamed for an outbreak of HIV in his home state. Meanwhile, the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention in Atlanta is warning the true number of U.S. coronavirus cases might be higher than reported because test kits sent out nationwide earlier this month included a faulty component. After headlines, we'll spend the rest of the hour discussing the growing threat of the coronavirus. In Milwaukee, Wisconsin, a gunman opened fire inside a sprawling Molson Coors brewery Wednesday, killing 5 people before taking his own life. The shooter was identified as a 51-year-old man who worked at the factory complex. Police have not yet identified a motive in the killing. In immigration news, a new report by Physicians for Human Rights finds the Trump administration's separation of families at the U.S.-Mexico border is tantamount to torture. The report studied 17 adults and 9 children separated for about 2 months under Trump's so-called zero-tolerance policy, finding people experience shock, terror, and grief constituting cruel, unusual, and degrading treatment. The report warns of long-lasting effects of family separations, with people put at higher risk of anxiety, depression, psychosis, and addiction, along with higher rates of chronic medical conditions like cardiovascular disease and premature death. In Arizona, federal prosecutors Wednesday dropped a misdemeanor charge against humanitarian aid volunteer Scott Warren 1 day before he was to be sentenced for driving on protected lands to drop water, food, and other aid to migrants crossing the Sonoran Desert. The single misdemeanor count was the last charge faced by Scott Warren, who at one point faced up to 20 years in federal prison for felony charges of harboring migrants after he provided food, water, and shelter to a pair of men who barely survived their journey into the U.S. After a first trial ended in a hung jury, Scott Warren was acquitted of felony charges in a second trial. To see our full coverage of the Warren case, including our trip with him on a water drop in the Sonoran Desert last summer, go to DemocracyNow.org. The House of Representatives voted 410 to 4 Thursday to make lynching a federal hate crime. The Emmett Till Anti-Lynching Act was named for the 14-year-old African-American boy whose killing 65 years ago remains one of the most horrific examples of racial terror in the Jim Crow South. If signed into law by President Trump, the bill will finally end what proponents say have been 200 failed attempts to pass similar legislation. This is California Democrat, African-American Congresswoman Karen Bass, who co-sponsored the anti-lynching bill.
A 1930 editorial in Raleigh News and Observer noted the elation of the audience witnessing a lynching as follows. Girls giggled as the flies fed on the blood that dripped from the Negro's nose. Lynchings were brutal, violent, and savage public spectacles. As I said, they were advertised in newspapers and postcards were sold. Souvenirs were made from victims' remains.
Federal officials said Wednesday they've arrested 5 members of a far-right white nationalist group who are conspiring to threaten and intimidate journalists and activists around the United States. U.S. prosecutors say members of the neo-Nazi group Atomwaffen threatened Black and Jewish journalists in Arizona and the Seattle area, while others harassed and threatened an unnamed reporter from ProPublica. The reporter is likely journalist A.C. Thompson, who's written extensively about Atomwaffen and one of its leaders, John Cameron Denton, who was among those arrested on Wednesday. In media news, ABC has suspended veteran correspondent David Wright after a far-right activist published secretly recorded video in which Wright complains about President Trump and corporate control of the mass media. In the 7-minute, highly edited video posted online by the group Project Veritas, Wright is overheard calling himself a socialist who favors national health insurance and stating there are too many billionaires and too big a wealth gap. Wright goes on to say the, quote, commercial imperative is incompatible with news and blasts ABC's parent company, Disney, for cross-promoting its entertainment brands on shows like Good Morning America. Project Veritas is a right-wing group that often sets up sting operations targeting Planned Parenthood, journalists, and activists by recording covert videos and releasing deceptively edited footage. The group's founder, James O'Keefe, was convicted on a misdemeanor charge after he attempted to wiretap the phones of then U.S. Senator Mary Landrieu in 2010. In response to its latest sting operation, media critic Dan Frumkin called Project Veritas loathsome, but said in this case the group had done the U.S. a favor. Frumkin wrote, quote, "The group's sneaky surveillance has uncovered someone speaking profound truths about how commercial pressures have skewed corporate media's political news values, not toward making things up, but toward turning it all into shallow, value-neutral entertainment," unquote. In Saudi Arabia, U.S. Marines held joint military exercises Wednesday with their Saudi counterparts on the King Abdulaziz naval base. The war games along the Persian Gulf were widely seen as a warning to Iran. The joint exercises came as Houthi rebels in northern Yemen launched a new offensive following a recent increase in the number of U.S.-backed Saudi-led coalition airstrikes in Yemen. More than 100,000 people have died. Far more have been displaced since Saudi Arabia began its war on Yemen in 2015 with the support of the Obama administration at the time. In Philadelphia, 7 Jewish activists were arrested Tuesday outside Joe Biden's campaign headquarters, calling on the presidential contender to skip the annual conference of AIPAC, the American Israel Public Affairs Committee. Members of the progressive Jewish organization, If Not Now, are demanding Biden reverse decades of support for Israel's occupation of the West Bank and Gaza, first as head of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee and later as vice president. The protests came as the presidential campaigns of Amy Klobuchar and Pete Buttigieg said they would not attend this year's AIPAC conference following similar moves by Senators Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders. In a statement, If Not Now co-founder Danny Miscavige wrote, quote, "Even moderates in the Democratic Party are now refusing to attend a conference by a right-wing lobby that allies with bigots just to shield the Israeli government from any consequence for denying the Palestinian people freedom and dignity," unquote. Billionaire former New York City mayor and Democratic presidential hopeful Michael Bloomberg is scheduled to attend the AIPAC conference in March as a keynote speaker. In Puerto Rico, a transgender activist was shot and killed early Monday morning, just hours after someone called police to complain that she'd used a public restroom at a McDonald's. Disturbing video posted to social media appears to show the final moment of Nulisa Luciano Ruiz's life, as her attackers followed her in a car before opening fire with at least 10 gunshots. Local police say they suspect 4 teenagers were involved in the murder. Ruiz was at least the second trans or gender nonconforming person murdered in the U.S. in 2020. In climate news, the Trump administration's abruptly halted a project to protect the New York City region from flooding due to rising seas and extreme weather, just weeks after President Trump mocked plans to build a seawall to protect the city as costly, foolish, and environmentally unfriendly. The move ends a $19 million project by the Army Corps of Engineers to research what steps would best protect residents of coastal New York and New Jersey, along with low-lying areas of New York Harbor. And on Capitol Hill, New York Congressmember Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez read the entirety of the Green New Deal into the congressional record Wednesday, 1 year after she first introduced the historic legislation.
I realize that many of my colleagues have never even read the resolution that they're speaking on. They haven't opened a single word of it. And it's actually only about, I have it right in front of me, just 14 pages long. So I have decided that since my colleagues, some of my colleagues across the aisle, could not, for some reason, read the resolution, that perhaps this hour would be spent best reading it to them.
The New Deal seeks to bring the U.S. to net zero greenhouse gas emissions in 10 years while investing in public transit and federal jobs, fully transitioning the U.S. electricity grid off fossil fuels, and codifying indigenous people's rights to prior consent and approval for decisions that affect them. And those are some of the headlines. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. The coronavirus disease that was first diagnosed in China's Hubei province has now spread to at least 47 countries in every continent except Antarctica. The World Health Organization has declared the outbreak an international health emergency. Nearly 3,000 people have died so far. More than 81,000 have now been infected with the virus that causes the respiratory disease COVID-19. To contain the spread of the coronavirus in Japan, where the number of cases has reached 200, today the Prime Minister Shinzo Abe called for schools to close.
I request all elementary, middle, and high schools and special needs schools to be temporarily closed from March 2nd until spring vacation.
Meanwhile, Japan says the 2020 Summer Olympics are still scheduled to take place in the capital, Tokyo. In South Korea, the number of coronavirus cases has passed 1,700, making it the largest outbreak outside of China. At least one U.S. soldier stationed at a base in the area has tested positive for the virus, and the U.S. and South Korea have called off joint military exercises. This comes as the government of Iran says at least 245 people have been infected and 26 have died, but experts say the toll is likely much higher. Meanwhile, officials in Kuwait reported 43 new cases, and Saudi Arabia has taken the unprecedented step of barring Muslim pilgrims from entering the country to visit the holy cities of Mecca and Medina. Here in the United States, President Trump downplayed the threat from coronavirus and announced Vice President Mike Pence would be his point person to coordinate government efforts to prevent a widespread outbreak.
Because of all we've done, the risk to the American people remains very low. And we have the greatest experts in the world, really in the world, right here. We're ready to adapt, and we're ready to do whatever we have to as the disease spreads, if it spreads.
As Trump spoke at his White House news conference, a new milestone in the coronavirus outbreak was reported in a possible example of community spread. A person was diagnosed with the virus in Northern California who'd not traveled to any of the affected regions of the world, nor had known contact with anyone else who did. Officials say they don't know how the person was exposed and have begun tracing the person's contacts in order to determine how they got sick. On Wednesday morning, Trump tweeted, quote, "Low ratings, fake news, MSDNC, Comcast, and CNN are doing everything possible to make the coronavirus look as bad as possible, including panicking markets, if possible. Likewise, their incompetent do-nothing Democrat comrades are all talk, no action, USA in great shape," President Trump tweeted, misspelling the word coronavirus. This is Democratic Congress member Joe Kennedy of Massachusetts questioning Health and Human Services Secretary Alex Azar Wednesday.
Mr. Secretary, I don't want to panic over this either. The stock market's crashing. He's trying to stop a stock market. He's not trying. He's outright contradicting everything that you all have just said. Outright contradiction.
I think he's expressing confidence in...
With no medical basis for it. That's what you've just explained to us. Come on, sir.
He's expressing that the American people need to take a breath here, that there's no change to anyone's daily life from this, that the country has a plan. We have pandemic plans.
Meanwhile, the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention in Atlanta is warning the true number of U.S. coronavirus cases might be higher than reported because test kits sent out nationwide earlier this month included a faulty component. To break down the news on the outbreak worldwide and here in this country, we're joined here in New York by Laurie Garrett, former senior fellow for global health at the Council on Foreign Relations, Pulitzer Prize-winning science writer, author of several books, including Ebola, Story of an Outbreak, The Coming Plague, Newly Emerging Diseases in a World Out of Balance, and Betrayal of Trust, The Collapse of Global Public Health. In a recent piece for Foreign Policy, she wrote, Trump has sabotaged America's coronavirus response. And she has another piece, How China's Incompetence Endangered the World. Laurie, welcome back to Democracy Now! It's great to have you with us. So talk about the first news conference President Trump has held at the White House as he appointed, he wouldn't call him the czar, but as he appointed the vice president, Pence, as the point person on dealing with the coronavirus.
Well, obviously, Pence needed some job besides Space Force. So now he has something to do in the White House. But all joking aside, Pence is not a medical expert, and he certainly is not someone who's demonstrated particularly great amount of respect for science. When he was governor of the state of Indiana, the opioid crisis started in southern Indiana, and suddenly people were injecting opioids. He went to his God and came back and told the legislature that he did not believe that any human being should receive sterile syringes to assist them in being a drug addict. His own legislature countered him. He vetoed. Meanwhile, according to a study published by Yale University, at least 250 people got infected with HIV as a result of this crazy policy.
And he also, of course, defunded Planned Parenthood, leading the movement in Congress, and they had the one HIV testing site in the area. And it was the Indiana model that President Trump cited in saying that he was qualified to lead this effort. Exactly. Now, let's talk about what's happening here. While it is said that the U.S. has far fewer cases of coronavirus than anywhere else, in fact, there is almost no testing that's being done.
We can't say that we don't have a lot of cases. The last time I looked at the count, we had tested 456 people in the entire United States. To put that in comparison, in Seoul, South Korea alone, they've tested 35,000. Now, you're not going to find cases if you're testing 456 people out of 260 million Americans. You're going to miss quite a number. What we should be doing right at this moment, the most urgent thing we should be doing, is testing every single pneumonia patient that is hospitalized. Because if there's likely to be a sneak through of this epidemic, it's going to come through as a pneumonia patient. It's going to be diagnosed as flu or some other cause. And it's actually going to be this coronavirus, and COVID-19 will break out in the hospital ward. Because what we've seen all over the world so far is these outbreaks really explode when they hit one of two things: a religious site, where you have large concentrations of people coming in for a religious festival of some sort, or a hospital. And if the index of suspicion isn't very, very high among the healthcare workers—
or a cruise ship.
Well, cruise ship, that's just a petri dish. But if the healthcare workers aren't really on their toes, really alert, thinking what if, and they don't have the right protective gear, then as they examine that patient, they become infected. And so this is our problem right now. Now, this particular case in Northern California is very worrying because the individual lived in a rural area, was not a traveler, didn't know any travelers, was a local worker of some sort. We don't know a lot of details, 61-year-old male, and was in various health facilities getting misdiagnosed. And it was the health providers themselves who were saying to the public health of California, which was in turn saying it to CDC in Atlanta, we want this person tested for the coronavirus. We think that's what this is. And the CDC said, no, it doesn't look like it, and didn't do a test.
On Capitol Hill, lawmakers grilled senior administration officials over their response to the crisis. This is Louisiana Republican Senator John Kennedy, who on Tuesday blasted the acting Homeland Security Secretary Chad Wolf for struggling to produce basic facts about the coronavirus outbreak.
You're supposed to keep us safe.
My budget supports the men and women of the Department of Homeland Security.
You're the Secretary of Homeland Security.
Yes, sir.
And you can't tell me if we have enough respirators.
What I would tell you is that the budget, my budget, our operations are focused not only on the men and women of DHS, making sure they're protected to do their jobs, to screen individuals coming in. We're working with HHS, CDC, and their budgets
know the answer, do you?
to ensure that they have enough medical equipment.
Do we have enough face masks?
We, for the Department of Homeland Security, we do.
I'm not asking for the Department of Homeland Security.
Are you looking?
I'm asking for the American people.
For the entire American public?
Yes.
No, I would say probably not.
Okay, how short are we?
I don't have that number offhand, Senator. I will get that for you.
Okay, but I want to be sure I understand. Somebody,
yes, sir,
is doing modeling.
Yes, sir,
on how many cases we're anticipating. You're
yes,
just
sir.
not aware of that.
You're asking me a number of medical questions that
I'm asking
CDC
you questions
and
because you're
HHS
Secretary of the Department
on.
of Homeland Security, and you're supposed to keep us safe.
Yes, sir.
And you need to know the answers to these questions.
And
how far away are we from getting a vaccine?
In several months.
Well, that's not what we just heard testimony about.
Okay.
Who's on first here?
So that was the Republican Louisiana Senator, John Kennedy, questioning the head of Homeland Security, Chad Wolf. Lori Garrett.
Pretty abysmal situation. Where we are right now is that everybody is recognizing, oops, it was a big mistake by the Trump administration to obliterate the entire infrastructure of pandemic response that the Obama administration had created. Why did he do it? Well, it certainly wasn't about the money, because it wasn't a heavily funded program. It was certainly because it was Obama's program.
And explain, you're talking about the unit within the Centers for Disease Control.
No, we're talking about something much vaster than that. It was a special division inside the National Security Council, a special division inside of the Department of Homeland Security that Bozo was talking from, and collaborating centers in HHS headquarters in Washington, the Office of Global Health Affairs, and the Commerce Department, Treasury Department. But what Obama understood dealing with Ebola in 2014 is that any American response had to be an all-of-government response, that there were so many agencies overlapping, and they all had a little piece of the puzzle in the case of a pandemic. Just do this mental exercise with me, Amy. If we get to the situation where we're anything like what's going on in China right now, then our Department of Commerce, our Department of Transportation, and our Department of USDA would have to collaborate to get food deliveries all over America so that parts of America don't starve. And you could see in China convoys, hundreds of 18-wheeler vehicles completely full of food coming into Wuhan every single day. Do we have the capacity to coordinate that? What the Obama administration realized was that you can't corral multiple agencies and things from private sector as well as public sector to come to the aid of America unless you have some one person in charge who's really the manager of it all. And that in his case, it was Ron Klain, who had worked under Vice President Biden. And he was designated with an office inside the White House to give orders and coordinate all these various things. Well, that was all eliminated. It's gone. And now they're hastily trying to recreate something. And last night, there were many names tossed around about who he was going to appoint as head of the response. He had previously gone on the record, President Trump, saying, I have great faith in Secretary Azar, and my HHS secretary will be in charge. And we're told from multiple sources that right up until they got on stage for that press briefing, Azar thought he was in charge. And then the president says, and here's my good friend Mike Pence, and he's taking charge.
Well, there are reports that Trump was very angry that Azar had even raised the concerns he did publicly because Trump was majorly concerned about the markets, and that he had brought people in to the United States from the cruise ship. Right. They were Americans, and they were, as you were saying, sitting in a petri dish. That cruise ship of thousands, hundreds of people got infected, even when they were in lockdown.
We're approaching 1,000. It may very well end up that half of the crew and passengers will be infected before that story finishes playing out.
I want to turn to President Trump addressing reporters Wednesday night at the White House press briefing room. One of the reporters questioned Trump on his comments about how former President Obama handled the Ebola outbreak in 2014.
I want to talk to you about 2014. During the Ebola crisis, you said you wanted a quote-unquote full travel ban. You said Obama was a quote-unquote stubborn dope, not for doing it. You said, just stop the flights, dummies. You also said it was a quote-unquote total joke to appoint someone to lead the Ebola response with, quote, zero experience in the medical field. Now you've appointed
They listened to a lot of what I had to say.
I did. So how does that square with what you're doing now?
They listened to a lot, well, because this is a much different problem than Ebola. Ebola, you disintegrated, especially at the beginning. They've made a lot of progress now in Ebola. But with Ebola, we were talking about it before. You disintegrated. You got Ebola. That was it. This one is different, much different. This is a flu. This is like a flu. And this is a much different situation than Ebola. But and we're working on Ebola right now, by the way. We're working on certain areas of the Congo. The Congo has Ebola, and caused largely by the fact that they have war and people can't get there. We can now treat Ebola. At that time, it was infectious, and you couldn't treat it. Nobody knew anything about it. Nobody had ever heard of anything like this. So it's a much different situation.
So that was President Trump. Lori Garrett, you wrote a book about Ebola. You wrote Ebola, the story of an outbreak. But also now they're trying to take money from the Ebola budget, dealing with Ebola, not to mention slash the CDC budget. His latest budget that went to Congress was cutting health services in this country.
Yeah. Well, you know, we've gotten used to Trump being a pile of contradictions and misstatements. But in the case of an epidemic, this is incredibly dangerous. I think part of what Donald Trump's been doing is he's been playing to Rush Limbaugh and the far right, because they have started a narrative that says well, they have two narratives. One is there isn't any epidemic. This is all fake news, exaggerating everything to undermine Trump's bid for re-election. There's a lot of that going on. Rush Limbaugh is leading that charge. Another narrative out there coming from the right is this was all made in a laboratory in China, and this is an evil bioterrorism something or other, and our president has to show strength at this time. Both are lies, and both people who play around a lot on social media, regardless of their political stance, are absorbing them because they don't understand where it's coming from.
I wanted to go to a CNN reporter, Marshall Cohen, tweeting, quote, Rush Limbaugh and right-wing fringe sites are attacking Dr. Nancy Messonnier, a top CDC official handling the coronavirus response, because she is Rod Rosenstein's sister. They're spreading the lie that she's part of the deep state and trying to tank the markets to weaken Trump, unquote. This is a clip of Dr. Messonnier discussing the coronavirus crisis.
Some community-level interventions that may be most effective in reducing the spread of a new virus, like school closures, are also the most likely to be associated with unwanted consequences and further disruptions. Secondary consequences of some of these measures might include missed work and loss of income. I understand this whole situation may seem overwhelming and that disruption to everyday life may be severe, but these are things that people need to start thinking about now.
So that's Dr. Nancy Messonnier. Laurie Garrett.
Yeah, well, she's right, and we all need to be getting ready. I mean, we don't need to be distracted by this insane political situation. We need to be focused on what we're going to do when this virus sweeps across America. And it's no longer a, distant, crazy idea. The kind of things I've received death threats. Every time I'm on your show, somebody calls and tries to kill me. And every time I'm on your show, I get loonies telling me they know of a secret cure. It's this stuff you rub off a tree, or it's this thing you put under your pillow, or whatever. And if I don't show positive response and say, oh, yay, I'm going to tell America to use that junk you scraped off a tree, then they threaten me. And there are people who want any epidemic situation to be something they can exploit for a set of principles they have or ideas. But this is not the moment for that. We have a very narrow window, America, to get our act together. And getting our act together means at an individual level, at a community level, at a business level, at a school level.
It even seems that President Trump doesn't understand the deadly nature of this. He was being questioned by Sanjay Gupta of CNN at that news conference. And he did not seem to understand that the coronavirus is, 20 times more deadly than the flu?
No, more like 2,000 times. No, he completely got his numbers wrong, although numbers probably are not his forte to begin with. He said, well, let's say it correctly rather than misinform. The coronavirus mortality rate is running somewhere between 2 to 4%, and depending where you look and which population groups you're in. The 1918 flu, which was the most devastating influenza in the history of our species, was less than 2%. So this is already more lethal than the pandemic of 1918. Garden variety everyday flu, it's about 0.1 to 0.01% fatal.
Final comments as we look at what's happening in the world, every continent but Antarctica. What does it mean to have a unified response?
Well, we won't have a unified response. We don't. It's fragmented. It's fragmented within countries, and it's fragmented among countries. Already, everybody's sealing their borders. Everybody starts saying, no, you can't fly here. You can't. What we're going to see, and what's unfolding now, and the reason that the smart guys on the stock market are getting upset, is that the whole globalization system, the chain of supply and shipping is fragmenting. And it's fragmenting amid fear and amid the false idea that in the age of air travel, you can somehow stop a virus by just saying, no, you're not allowed to land at that airport. Well, how did this fellow way up in Northern California in a rural area get infected? We've been screening at San Francisco airport since day one of this mess. So I think that the problem is we don't have a solidified response. And what you're going to see, and it's already playing out, is this NIMBY attitude. You know, we already have states saying, we're not going to allow you to put quarantine people in our state. Ship them to another state. And, oh, my state has plenty of masks on supply. We're not sharing them with the bozos next door. In every tabletop exercise I've ever been in for the last 30 years, role-playing what would happen in an outbreak, the solidarity between the states of the United States completely breaks down. States put borders. They won't let you come on a highway, and they block goods from leaving the state. No, that may be destined for Illinois, but we in Indiana want those supplies. You can't take them to Illinois.
Well, we're going to leave it there now, but of course we'll continue to cover this. Laurie Garrett, the former senior fellow for global health at the Council on Foreign Relations, Pulitzer Prize-winning science writer. Among her books, Ebola, Story of an Outbreak, The Coming Plague, Newly Emerging Diseases in a World Out of Balance, and Betrayal of Trust, The Collapse of Global Public Health. When we come back, is there a connection between the coronavirus and climate change? Stay with us. Wars of Faith by Audio Machine. This is Democracy Now! I'm Amy Goodman. As we continue to look at the spread of the coronavirus, with cases now diagnosed in at least 47 countries and on every continent save Antarctica. Nearly 3,000 people have died so far. The World Health Organization has declared the outbreak an international health emergency. For more, we're joined from Cleveland, Ohio by Sonia Shah, science investigative journalist and the author of Pandemic, Tracking Contagion from Cholera to Ebola and Beyond. Her new book is titled The Next Great Migration, The Beauty and Terror of Life on the Move. Her latest article, published in The Nation, Think Exotic Animals Are to Blame for the Coronavirus? Think Again. Explain, Sonia Shah, and thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me. What I was trying to get at in that article was this fact that over the past 50 years, we've had over 300 new pathogens either kind of newly emerge that never have been seen before or come into new places where they've never been before. This novel coronavirus is just one of a whole spate of other pathogens we've seen. Ebola in West Africa, where it had never been seen before. Zika in the Americas, where it had never been seen before. New kinds of tick-borne diseases, new kinds of mosquito-borne diseases, new kinds of highly drug-resistant bacterial pathogens. And we know that about 60% of these new pathogens originate in the bodies of animals. About 70% of those are in wild animals. But it's not because wild animals are particularly infested. It's because of the way humans and wildlife are coming into novel, intimate contact, and that is because of human activities.
So talk about this connection between climate crisis and the coronavirus. We're not hearing very much about this.
Well, we know in a general sense that the climate crisis is resulting in tens of thousands of wild species moving into new places. It's scrambling our migration patterns. And so that's going to contribute to this broader phenomenon of people and wildlife coming into new kinds of contact. We can see with, for example, deforestation, that when you cut down the trees where bats roost, for example, they don't just go away. They come and roost in your back gardens and your farms and your yards instead. And that allows people and bats to come into new kinds of contact, and the microbes that live in their bodies, which don't cause them any kind of disease, can spill over into human bodies, and that's how we turn animal microbes into these epidemic and pandemic causing pathogens.
So how should this be dealt with? How should people understand the coronavirus? Diseases always exist, but how are epidemics and pandemics preventable?
I mean, infectious disease is always going to exist. We live on a microbial planet, so that's part of the human condition. We're not going to get rid of all of the microbes, nor would we ever want to. But pandemics are something that we can do a lot to prevent. There's a lot we can do to protect wildlife habitat, for example, so that the microbes in animals' bodies stay in their bodies and don't cross over into our bodies. We can do a lot to do active surveillance, to actually look for microbes that might be turning into human pathogens and try to contain them before they start to cause epidemics. And that is scientific work that has been really successful over the past 10 years. So if we have the political will to continue funding that kind of research, there's a lot that we can do to kind of reduce the risk of pandemics.
This is Congressmember Jan Schakowsky questioning Health and Human Services Secretary Alex Azar Wednesday about whether the coronavirus will be affordable to all.
You're saying it will for sure be affordable for anyone who needs it.
I'm saying we would want to ensure that we work to make it affordable, but we can't control that price because we need the private sector to invest. The priority is to get vaccines and therapeutics. Price controls won't get us there.
Schakowsky tweeted following the hearing she gave Azar 3 chances to assure us that any coronavirus vaccines or treatments developed with U.S. taxpayer dollars will be affordable and accessible to everyone, and he flat out refused to do so. Sonia Shah.
I mean, it's just reprehensible. I think there's a well understood principle in the global health community that these are commodities that we need to make public. So, you know, this is like a real failure of leadership, and it's a travesty.
Finally, what do you feel the corporate media, the mainstream media, is missing here that you feel is essential for people to understand?
I think there's a sense in which we kind of frame narrative around disease outbreaks as something foreign, like an encroachment from outside that invades us, and kind of posits us as sort of these passive victims. But actually, and I think that really obscures the larger story, which is that there's a lot of human agency involved in how we're turning microbes into pathogenic and pandemic-causing pathogens. So I think we need to recast the whole way we talk about disease as not a problem of foreign invasion. We talk a lot about places when we talk about where diseases come from. We talk about the Wuhan flu or the Spanish influenza, even though that influenza did not originate in Spain. So there's a sense in which we want to try to make it seem like these are foreign things that are coming to get us and encroach upon us, and that's a habit of mind that we have around a lot of other subjects as well. But I think that obscures what our own role is. And there's a lot we can do and that we are doing. We are turning a lot of these microbes into these pathogenic microbes instead.
And finally, with the Trump administration gutting the very government programs that were tasked to deal with something like this, the CDC cut 80% of its efforts to prevent global disease outbreaks because it was, quote, running out of money. The department went from working in 49 countries to just 10, with President Trump and with his isolationist tendencies. You know, why give money to other countries? Explain why, Sonia Shah.
Well, I think the other program that's been cut that it probably protected us from unknown pathogens that we don't know how much we've been protected is the PREDICT program, which was through the USAID and funded scientists to actually look for microbes that might be turning into pathogens. And over 10 years, they found about 900 different microbes that might be doing that, and were able to contain them at their source. So that's the kind of program that the Trump administration also cut. And I think the reason they gave was that they were uncomfortable funding cutting-edge science.
Well, Sonia Shah, I want to thank you for being with us, science investigative journalist, author of Pandemic, Tracking Contagion from Cholera to Ebola and Beyond. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. We will link to her piece in the Nation magazine that she just wrote called Think Exotic Animals Are to Blame for the Coronavirus? Think Again when we come back. As Trump leaves India, the death toll from anti-Muslim violence in New Delhi has risen to at least 34. We'll go to Delhi. Stay with us.
Who owns this land? There is a green mark on it. Mikasa es su casa, says the man who stole your land. Mikasa es su casa, says the man who sold your land. Is this tattoo henna or ink? Does it fade? Who remembers all of the patterns you've made?
Birthright by Sarathi Korwar. This is Democracy Now! I'm Amy Goodman as we go now to India, where the death toll from anti-Muslim violence in Delhi has risen to at least 34, with police accused of standing by as Hindu nationalist mobs assault Muslims. The violence began Sunday when groups of Hindus attacked peaceful sit-ins of Muslims protesting against Hindu nationalist Prime Minister Narendra Modi's new citizenship law, which widely restricts Muslim immigration to India. This is Mohammed Zubair, who said he was on his way home from a local mosque in northeast New Delhi when he was attacked by a mob.
20
to 25 people started beating me. The rest were standing by as if they were watching a show. There were thousands behind them. They kept hitting me. Nobody came forward to save me. Somehow, some people came from the other side. I was like unconscious. I didn't have much consciousness. My clothes were drenched in blood.
Prime Minister Modi said nothing as the violence continued for days, instead hosting President Donald Trump on a two-day state visit in which Trump heaped praise on the Indian Prime Minister. This is Trump speaking about Modi at a news conference back in Washington Wednesday.
He's a great gentleman, a great leader. It's an incredible country. We were treated very, very well, and we really enjoyed it. A lot of tremendous progress was made in terms of relationship. Our relationship with India is extraordinary right now, and we're going to be doing a lot of business with India. They're sending billions and billions of dollars now to the United States.
On Sunday, human rights lawyer Arjun Sethi called Modi and Trump the worst kind of fascists. He tweeted, both Modi and Trump have criminalized minority communities, championed fake news, and persecuted dissent, promoted supremacist ideologies, and played on the racism and anxiety of dominant communities, unquote. Modi broke his silence Wednesday, calling for peace on Twitter. But many critics have noted the Indian Prime Minister served as the chief minister of Gujarat when one of India's worst anti-Muslim riots took place in 2002 that left at least 1,000 people dead. After the bloodshed, the U.S. State Department revoked Modi's visa, saying it could not grant a visa to any foreign government official who was, quote, responsible for or directly carried out at any time particularly severe violations of religious freedom, unquote. Modi has never apologized for or explained his actions at the time. Well, for more, we're joined by two guests. From Democracy Now! Video stream in New Delhi, Neha Dixit is with us, independent journalist based there. Her investigative reporting focuses on politics, gender, and social justice, recipient of the 2019 International Press Freedom Award from the Committee to Protect Journalists. And in Ithaca, New York, speaking to us from Cornell University, Priya Gopal, who's on the Faculty of English at the University of Cambridge in Britain, author of Insurgent Empire, Anti-Colonial Resistance and British Dissent. We welcome you both to Democracy Now! Let's begin with Neha Dixit in New Delhi. Tell us what has happened there in the wake of President Trump's trip. What took place in New Delhi?
Thank you, Amy. In the last 3 days, we've seen a spell of violence in various parts of New Delhi, especially in the northeastern district. As of now, the death toll has gone up to 34, but the people are still in the process of finding dead bodies everywhere and raising the official count. What happened on Sunday was that since December 2019, several people across the national capital have been protesting against the Citizenship Amendment Act that was passed. A lot of these protests have been led by Muslim women and with the participation of various other communities against this law that excludes Muslims. So on Sunday night, a pro-CAA group, pro-Citizenship Amendment Act group, which was led by a member of the Bharatiya Janata Party, the BJP, which is also Narendra Modi's party, they came there. This BJP member called Kapil Mishra, who is also a former MLA of the area, member of Legislative Assembly in Delhi, he incited violence. There's evidence of that, saying that the protesters should move and go back. And it is from Sunday night till yesterday evening, the violence continues. Lots of schools, offices have been gutted. Most of these are working class Muslim areas. There are a large mob has been reported in various parts, stone pelting, using tear gas, using petrol bombs, and all this happened in the presence of police. There have been several videos that show that the police is standing while this kind of violence is being meted out by the mob on the people in these neighborhoods. The other thing also happened was that this is the first time yesterday I met several people who were injured. Apart from petrol bombs and guns and torches, acid was used on several people, so which is why lots of people have lost their eyes, have had damaged faces. Again, each time somebody tried to stop the mob from attacks, the police did not help them. Instead stood as bystanders. Also, the police also joined at several places to raise Hindu slogans such as Jai Shri Ram. So this has been the situation the last 3 days. 34 people who have been killed. The bodies are still at the hospitals. The postmortems are still conducted, but lack of government support, lack of administrative support has led to no timely treatment for the people who've been injured. And this has been brewing for the last 2.5 months since the government passed the Citizenship Amendment Act, because it exclusively is meant to keep out the Muslim community in the country. And while these protests were resorting to non-violence and constitutionalism, clearly this kind of violence was used. And not just the various kinds of hate speeches have been used in the recent Delhi elections also. And it has created an atmosphere by the silence of the Prime Minister, under whose jurisdiction, under the central government, under whose the Delhi police is under, that anybody who raises right-wing Hindu nationalist slogans or takes their agenda forward on the road enjoy impunity and are encouraged by this kind of silence from Modi and the other ministers.
And can you tell me, Neha, is this in any way where what just happened in New Delhi, is it related to President Trump being there and then being in Gujarat and 100,000 people for this Namaste Trump rally in answer to Trump going to Houston and welcoming Modi at that Howdy Modi rally?
I would definitely say that the kind of Islamophobia that we have seen in the recent past, in the last few years in India, is also kind of encouraged by President Trump in the way he has treated the minorities everywhere else. This kind of Islamophobia is encouraged by this kind of silence also from President Trump, because he was asked a question during the press conference and he did not respond to it. So there is a clear connection. Also, the fact that these elements are emboldened by the visits of somebody like Trump. And recently, we also had President Bolsonaro from Brazil, who kind of shares similar principles when it comes to minorities, when it comes to climate, when it comes to various other policies that leads to displacement. And when there is no reaction from them, and in fact they are seen as endorsing Prime Minister Modi in India, there is a kind of encouragement for such things here. I would also like to say that this is the first time, not the first time, but I would say we have not heard in the recent past where journalists in the last 3 days were actually attacked by mobs in the presence of police, and they were asked for their religion. So several non-Hindu journalists were threatened. They were forced to delete their videos, forced to delete photos. They were brutally attacked. Some of the Hindu journalists had to identify and say Hindu prayers so that they are let off by the mob. And this is unprecedented. And in this kind of a situation now, even reporting what is happening with a certain community has become such a problem. The other thing that happened was that lots of people who were injured and were in small nursing homes and needed better facilities and needed to be transferred to bigger hospitals. Ambulances were not allowed by the police to enter. So which is why on Tuesday midnight, some of the members of the civil society tried to contact the High Court, and the High Court at midnight, some judges passed an order saying that ambulances should be immediately allowed by the Delhi police, including several other things. Also, one of the judges who said that Delhi should not become like a 1984 situation. In 1984, Delhi witnessed a genocide of the Sikh community. And today, we hear that that judge has been also transferred. So I also want to point out that the institutions, the police, the judiciary, and the other people in the administration who are supposed to protect the constitutional rights of people in India, in a secular India, are also under grave threat under the political pressure right now.
I want to bring in Priya Gopal to this discussion. You're now in Ithaca at Cornell University. Your Twitter thread has been extremely significant in saying we have to reshape the framework that this is being seen in around the world and the language that's being used. Please explain, Professor Gopal.
Well, I think that we have to drop the language of clashes and even riots and communal violence. A lot of the language, certainly in the British press, and I think in the American press as well, has been presenting this as a conflict between equal and opposite sides, as a kind of religious fight. It is not a religious fight. We are witnessing a situation of very deep structural violence. There is a majoritarian supremacist party in power in India, and mobs directly incited by senior Indian politicians are roaming around in Muslim-majority areas, identifying Muslim shops, businesses, homes, setting them on fire, identifying Muslims, beating them up. There is some pushback, certainly, as you might expect, but this is not a situation of equality. And I've said that any press outfit which refers to this as clashes between Hindus and Muslims, or even as kind of riots, is actually culpable of a dereliction of duty and certainly of critical analysis. This is not a situation where equal and opposite forces are in conflict. It's not even a civil war. What we have is a very dangerous supremacist ideology that is now out on the streets. And I'm afraid that the parallels with 1930s Germany are extremely clear. What has taken place in Delhi in the last couple of days is comparable to the Reichskristallnacht, when Jewish businesses were attacked and set on fire. And I think that the world really needs to wake up to the gravity of the situation in India, because we are in a situation not unlike what was happening in Germany in the 1930s in its 21st century variation. But I think that to just play this out as conflicts and clashes and religious fights, I think is deeply irresponsible.
And President Trump paying homage to Mahatma Gandhi and at the same time hailing his $3 billion military helicopter deal with Modi, the significance of Trump's relationship with Modi. We just have 30 seconds.
Well, I'm afraid that, Modi has to be set in the context of the global rise of ethno-nationalism. Trump is a kind of apprentice to Modi rather than the other way around. Trump, I think, watches the situation in India and probably sees this as really a fantasy come true. The using of Gandhi to sanitize what is happening in India is now an old story, and Trump is simply picking up the narrative that has already been peddled by the Indian state. But this is not Gandhi's India by a long shot. What we have here is violent supremacism out on the streets of India. And if the world doesn't take notice, then like the coronavirus, this is also going to spread, and we will all pay the price.
Priya Gopal, I want to thank you for being with us, lecturer at the University of Cambridge, and Neha Dixit, an independent journalist based in New Delhi, India. And, of course, we'll continue to follow this study. Tune in Tuesday night for Democracy Now's Super Tuesday Live special broadcast with The Intercept starting at 7 p.m. Eastern Time until midnight, right here at DemocracyNow.org and on many stations around the country. We have job openings at Democracy Now! From producer to producing fellow to communications director and more. Go to DemocracyNow.org. I'm Amy Goodman. Thanks for joining us.